Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the debate stage with an air of confidence, her eyes locked on Karoline Leavitt, who had been waiting for this moment all day. The tension was palpable, the room filled with anticipation. It was the final round of the high-stakes political debate, and every word from these two women would count. The camera flashed, catching their every move as the audience leaned in closer, ready to witness the clash between two powerful figures. Karoline, with her usual brashness, had a reputation for throwing punches, but tonight was different. As the debate began, Karoline wasted no time in throwing the first verbal jab. "Jasmine, it's clear you've been busy running around making noise, but maybe you should take a seat, stop trying to run things you don't understand, and leave the big decisions to people who actually know what they're doing," she sneered, leaning forward in her chair. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some surprised by Karoline's sharp tone. Jasmine, unfazed, took a deep breath. She had expected this, but what came next was something no one had anticipated. Karoline's words grew louder, crossing a line that no one, not even her, had dared to cross. "Maybe if you went back to where you came from, you'd realize what real leadership looks like. Some people are born into positions, while others just make noise to be heard," Karoline said, a mocking smile playing on her lips. The room went dead silent. The air was thick with shock. Karoline's words were not just an attack on Jasmine's policies, but on her very identity. It was a cruel, unnecessary comment, meant to belittle and humiliate her. Jasmine, her hand resting on the podium, didn't flinch. She could feel the weight of the room's eyes on her, but she knew this was her moment. The audience, stunned, waited for her to respond. Most people would have been taken aback, speechless even. But Jasmine was not like most people. She had dealt with insults her entire life, and had built an armor of strength that nothing could penetrate. "Karoline," Jasmine began, her voice calm yet piercing, "I'd suggest you keep your personal attacks to yourself. You don't know a thing about me or where I came from. But let me show you something you clearly lack respect." The room was still as Jasmine continued, each word carrying the weight of her entire history, all the struggles and triumphs she'd overcome to get to this point. "You're right about one thing, Karoline. Some people are born into positions of privilege, while others have to fight every single day for a seat at the table. I'm not here because of a title or legacy. I'm here because I've earned it. Every step, every challenge, and every roadblock that's been put in my way, I've taken it in stride and I've overcome it." Karoline's smile faded, but she didn't back down. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as if trying to challenge Jasmine. "I don't need a lesson in perseverance from you," she snapped. But Jasmine wasn't done. "You think insulting me will take me down? You think your words have power over me? Maybe that works for some people, but not for me," she said, her tone unwavering. "Let me tell you something, Karoline. It's easy to stand behind a microphone and make cheap shots. But it takes courage to stand up to real adversity, to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. That's what leadership looks like, and I don't need to look like you to lead." The audience shifted, some nodding in agreement, others still stunned by the intensity of the exchange. It was clear this wasn't just another political debate. This was a clash of ideologies, of values, and of personalities. Jasmine's words had struck a chord, and Karoline knew she had been outmatched. But the debate was far from over. What Jasmine had said had ignited something in the room, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a new kind of leadership emerging, one that didn't rely on division or hatred, but on strength, resilience, and the courage to stand up for what was right. And while Karoline's face remained frozen in a mask of defiance, Jasmine had already won. The next round would be even more intense, but one thing was clear. Karoline had underestimated Jasmine, and now the tables were about to turn. The story was just beginning. The room was electric, the air thick with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt's remark had landed like a punch, and everyone in the room could feel the sting. For a moment, silence reigned. The audience was waiting for something, anything that could break the tension. The question lingered in the air. Would Jasmine back down, or would she retaliate with the same force that Karoline had thrown at her? Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked on Karoline, unwavering. The smile on Karoline's face had faded, replaced by a look of defiance, as if she was daring Jasmine to respond in kind. But Jasmine's calm demeanor was more powerful than any explosive reply could ever be. "I'm not here to engage in petty insults," she said softly, yet her words carried an unshakable authority. "I'm here to talk about the future of this country, to make decisions that will affect millions of lives. You can keep throwing jabs, Karoline, but I'm focused on something much bigger than your narrow perspective." The words rang out in the auditorium, sending ripples through the crowd. Jasmine's ability to stay composed, even in the face of such a personal attack, made her a force to be reckoned with. She wasn't just a politician. She was a voice of reason, a symbol of strength in the midst of a political storm. As her words sunk in, it became clear that Jasmine had turned the tables. Karoline, for all her bravado, had underestimated the power of grace under pressure. But Karoline was not one to let her ego be bruised so easily. "I don't need a lecture on leadership from someone who doesn't even know how to take responsibility for their own actions," she snapped, her voice sharp, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You want to talk about leadership? I'm the one with a plan. I'm the one who knows how to make decisions that actually make a difference." Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with the sharpness of someone who had heard it all before. "A plan?" she repeated, her voice growing louder with each word. "A plan that feeds the rich while leaving the rest of us to struggle? A plan that divides this country more than it unites it? If that's what you call leadership, Karoline, then we're in a lot more trouble than I thought." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jasmine's response was calculated, not just a clapback, but a calculated strike to the heart of Karoline's platform. Karoline's face flushed with anger, but she knew that Jasmine had hit a nerve. Her supporters, who had been so vocal earlier, now seemed to be hesitant, their eyes darting back and forth between the two women. The shift in energy was palpable. Karoline was losing ground, and she knew it. "I've spent my whole life working to make a real impact," Jasmine continued, her voice steady, but laced with an emotion that none of them had expected. "And I'm not going to let people like you, people who use their privilege to tear others down, define what leadership should look like. You might think you have power, Karoline, but real power comes from empathy, from understanding the struggles of others, and from lifting people up instead of tearing them down." The crowd was starting to shift, sensing the growing tide of support for Jasmine. It was evident now, Jasmine wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. And in that moment, she wasn't just a politician. She was a voice for the voiceless. Karoline, in her attempt to belittle Jasmine, had unwittingly sparked something much larger than a mere political debate. Karoline's expression darkened, her fists clenched under the table. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged like this, especially not by someone who was able to stand their ground so gracefully. It unnerved her. She tried to regain her composure, but the confidence she had once displayed seemed to crumble before her eyes. Jasmine had flipped the script, and there was no going back now. "You can keep pretending that your words have power," Jasmine continued, her gaze piercing through Karoline. "But the truth is, your insults don't faze me. I'm not here to play games. I'm here to fight for a future that works for everyone, not just the elite." Her words were sharp, and the passion behind them was undeniable. Jasmine was no longer just defending herself. She was on the offensive, and she was winning. As the debate raged on, the dynamic between the two women had shifted entirely. What started as a personal attack from Karoline had become a battle of ideals, a fight for the future of the nation. Jasmine, though calm on the surface, was in complete control now. The audience could feel the weight of her words, the sincerity behind her actions. They were witnessing something extraordinary, a display of leadership and integrity that was rare in today's political world. Karoline, for all her ambition and drive, had underestimated the power of someone who was not only intelligent and well-spoken, but who also had the strength of character to back up her words. Jasmine was no longer just a candidate. She was a force that could not be easily ignored or dismissed. And as the debate continued, it was clear that the outcome of this evening would be remembered for a long time. Jasmine had made her mark. She had stood tall in the face of adversity and had proven that true leadership wasn't about winning a debate. It was about making a difference. And for Karoline, the road ahead would not be so easy. The tension in the room was almost suffocating now. Every eye was on Karoline and Jasmine, the two women locked in a fierce, intellectual battle that seemed to have taken on a life of its own. The back and forth had escalated quickly, and it wasn't just about politics anymore. The fight had turned personal. Each word felt like a blow. Jasmine stood with her head held high, her hands steady on the table, while Karoline seethed. Her eyes narrowed and lips pressed tightly together. There was no mistaking it. Karoline had underestimated her opponent in ways that were now becoming painfully obvious. Jasmine could sense it. Her control over the room was undeniable. The crowd, which had once seemed divided, was now almost entirely on her side. Her calm confidence was a stark contrast to Karoline's increasingly volatile demeanor. It was as if every word Jasmine spoke dismantled Karoline's carefully constructed persona bit by bit. Jasmine wasn't here to simply defend herself. She was dismantling everything Karoline stood for, and she was doing it without raising her voice or losing her composure. "Is this really the future you envision for this country?" Jasmine asked, her voice cutting through the thick silence that had settled over the room. "A future where we silence those who don't agree with us. A future where we disregard the needs of the majority just because it doesn't fit into our narrow view of the world. I can't stand by and watch that happen." Karoline's jaw clenched. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Her lips trembled slightly, and for the first time, she seemed lost for words. Jasmine had exposed the cracks in her armor, and Karoline could feel them widening. The room seemed to grow even more tense, the audience almost holding their breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Karoline's pride wouldn't let her back down, though. She took a deep breath, her shoulders stiffening as she forced a smile. "You're so naive, Jasmine," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "You act like you have all the answers, like you're the only one who understands the struggles of the people. But you're not. You have no idea what it takes to actually make change. You think words and speeches are enough? That's not how the world works." Jasmine's gaze never wavered. She wasn't about to let Karoline's insults knock her off course. "The world works on compassion," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "On understanding the people you serve and making decisions that help them, not just the ones who can afford to buy their way into a better life. You're right, I don't know everything. But I know that I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to fight for those who have no voice." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Karoline to find something to say in response. And this time, Karoline hesitated. She was used to being the one who controlled the narrative, but Jasmine's clarity and conviction were too much for her to dismiss. Jasmine had dug deep into something Karoline couldn't deny: the growing divide between the powerful few and the everyday citizens they claimed to serve. It was a truth Karoline was uncomfortable facing. "You want to talk about fighting for people who have no voice?" Karoline sneered, her eyes flashing with anger. "You really think you're the hero in all this? You're nothing more than a puppet, repeating the same tired rhetoric that's been said for years. You don't have the guts to make the hard decisions." Jasmine's expression softened slightly, but there was still fire in her eyes. "Making hard decisions doesn't mean ignoring the people who need help the most," she replied. "It means doing what's right, even when it's not popular." You see, Karoline, leadership isn't about looking down from a pedestal and telling people what to do. It's about standing alongside them, understanding their struggles, and fighting for a future that includes everyone, not just the privileged few. The room was electric now. The air was thick with the weight of Jasmine's words. She wasn't just talking about policies anymore. She was talking about values that resonated with every person who had ever felt overlooked, disregarded, or silenced. She had found her rhythm, her voice becoming more commanding with every passing moment. And as Karoline stood there, fuming with rage, it became clear that Jasmine wasn't just winning the debate. She was making a statement. She was showing the audience, and Karoline, that leadership wasn't about ego or power, it was about service. And it was clear that Karoline's brand of leadership, based on division and exclusion, was no match for the vision Jasmine was painting, one of unity, compassion, and hope. Karoline's face reddened as she shot back, her words growing more frantic. You think you can change everything with a smile and a few words? You think you can solve the world's problems by just being nice? Her voice wavered now, no longer the calm, controlled tone she had used at the beginning of the debate. You're just a dreamer, Jasmine, and dreamers don't get anything done. Jasmine's voice was steady, unwavering. Dreamers are the ones who change the world. They're the ones who see the possibilities, even when everyone else only sees obstacles. And I will fight for those dreams, because I know they're not just dreams, they're the future. The audience erupted into applause. Jasmine had done it. She had not only held her ground, but had dismantled Karoline's arguments with poise and strength. Karoline's supporters, who had once been vocal and confident, were now silent, their eyes shifting uneasily as they watched their candidate falter. Karoline stood there, seething, unable to respond, her lips pressed into a tight line. The shift in the room was palpable. It was clear now that Jasmine was in control of the debate, and Karoline, for all her bluster, was no match for the force of Jasmine's resolve. As the applause died down, Jasmine stood tall, her eyes never leaving Karoline's. The battle was far from over, but in this moment, Jasmine had made it clear who the true leader was. She had not only exposed the flaws in Karoline's platform, but had shown the world what true leadership looked like, leadership rooted in compassion, strength, and an unwavering commitment to justice for all. And as the debate continued, it became obvious that the tide had turned. The question wasn't whether Karoline would win the debate. It was whether she could recover from the crushing blow Jasmine had delivered. The room was thick with anticipation, every person in the audience aware that the momentum had shifted. Karoline's earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by frustration and disbelief. Jasmine's words were like arrows, striking one after another, and Karoline seemed unable to defend herself anymore. Every attempt she made to claw back her dignity only pushed her deeper into a corner, and the walls were closing in. The difference between the two women had never been more apparent. Jasmine was calm, collected, and in complete control of the conversation. She spoke with a purpose, each sentence carrying the weight of conviction and clarity, while Karoline fumbled, her rhetoric falling flat, unable to land with the same force it had earlier in the debate. Jasmine's voice didn't waver. "You're right, Karoline," she said, her tone not angry but firm. "You're right to say that change isn't easy. But it's also not about playing the same old games over and over again, making promises that can't be kept. It's about making real, tangible improvements to the lives of the people you're supposed to serve. It's not about who has the loudest voice in the room. It's about who's actually willing to fight for the ones who don't have a voice at all." The room held its breath. Karoline's expression hardened, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She could feel the energy in the room shifting again, her words connecting with the very people who had come to hear this debate. Jasmine wasn't just arguing policy anymore. She was speaking directly to the hearts of the people who had felt ignored, overlooked, and dismissed for far too long. This wasn't about a debate between two politicians anymore. This was about something bigger. It was a battle for the soul of the country, for the very future of the people who were suffering under the weight of decisions made by the powerful few. "Look at what we've been told to accept for years," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining strength. "We've been told that healthcare is a luxury, that a living wage is a pipe dream, that people should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, without recognizing that many of them don't even have boots to start with." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in, watching the audience react to her raw honesty. "You call that leadership? You call that progress? I call it a failure. And I'm not going to sit by and let it continue." Karoline was now visibly rattled. She had no response to this line of reasoning, no way to counter the emotional weight behind Jasmine's words. The facade she had built around herself was starting to crumble, and Karoline's eyes darted nervously around the room, as if looking for an escape route that wasn't there. She had been in countless debates before, but this was different. She had never faced an opponent like Jasmine, someone who could dismantle her arguments with the kind of strength and precision Jasmine was showing now. Karoline opened her mouth to speak, but her words faltered. The crowd could sense it. The air had thickened with the understanding that Karoline had no more answers, no more defenses to hide behind. She was exposed. The emotional weight of Jasmine's words was too much for her to counter, and in that moment, it was clear to everyone watching that Jasmine wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the voiceless, the powerless, the forgotten. And that was a message that resonated deeply with the people. "You're right, Karoline," Jasmine said again, her voice steady and unyielding. "You can't fix everything overnight. But what you can do is start with the basics. You can start by ensuring that every person, no matter where they come from, has access to affordable health care, has the right to a decent job, and can live without the constant fear of falling through the cracks." Jasmine's eyes locked with Karoline's, and for the first time, Karoline's gaze faltered. There was a fire in Jasmine's eyes, a fire that burned with the urgency of a country that had been left behind, a fire that could no longer be ignored. It was a fire that demanded change, that refused to accept the status quo. And Karoline, despite her best efforts, couldn't snuff it out. Jasmine took a slow breath, then turned to face the audience. "I know you're all tired of the same old promises," she said, her voice carrying across the room, reaching every ear. "I know you're tired of hearing words without action. But this is different. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you the truth. And I'm here to fight for you, for all of you." The room exploded in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. This was genuine, heartfelt appreciation. People had been moved. They had been awakened by Jasmine's words, by her raw, unfiltered honesty. She wasn't a politician standing on a stage. She was a person who had reached into their lives and shown them a vision of something better, a vision of hope, of possibility. The applause grew louder, drowning out the sound of Karoline's quiet fury. And for a moment, the entire room was united in its belief in Jasmine's message. Karoline, still standing at the podium, was shaking now. Her face was red, her hands clenched into fists. She was no longer the confident, self-assured politician she had once been. She was a woman in retreat, a woman who had been outmatched, outclassed, and exposed for what she truly was, someone who could not, or would not, understand the struggles of the very people she was supposed to represent. Jasmine took a moment to let the applause die down, her eyes never leaving Karoline. She wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. "Karoline," Jasmine said softly, but with undeniable authority, "you may have your title, you may have your supporters, but you do not have the heart of the people. And that, Karoline, is what truly matters." The room fell silent again. Karoline's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time in the debate, she didn't know how to respond. She was defeated, and it was evident to everyone watching. Jasmine had won. The question now was whether Karoline would accept it or continue to fight an unwinnable battle. As the applause subsided, the tension in the room hung thick in the air. Everyone was waiting for what would come next, whether Karoline would try to make one last stand, or whether she would finally accept the truth that Jasmine had so carefully and effectively laid out before her. And in that moment, Jasmine knew that the battle was over. She had won the hearts of the people, and no amount of fury from Karoline could take that away. The question was no longer about politics, it was about the future. And with every word Jasmine spoke, she had set the stage for a future where compassion and integrity mattered more than power and ego. Karoline stood frozen, her face a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had been bested, not by a better politician, but by a person who understood what it meant to lead with heart. And now it was clear to everyone who the real leader was. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. The audience, once teetering between the two women's words, now stood firmly behind Jasmine. Their applause had become not just appreciation for her rhetoric, but a clear indication that they had witnessed something more profound, a victory, not just in a debate, but in an ideological battle that had been raging quietly beneath the surface for far too long. This wasn't about political games anymore. It wasn't even about policies anymore. It was about something far more personal, more human. It was about trust, integrity, and a sense of belonging. Jasmine's voice had resonated with a truth that could no longer be denied. And that truth was not just heard, it was felt deeply by everyone in the room. Jasmine paused, allowing the applause to wash over her. She wasn't reveling in the praise, but taking in the weight of the moment. She could feel the collective heartbeat of the room, the echo of their appreciation reverberating in her chest. This wasn't the validation of a politician. This was the connection between a person and the people they were fighting for. It was a bond that could not be broken, a bond that no amount of money, influence, or status could ever replace. Karoline, standing stiffly at her podium, was visibly shaken. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her pale and taut. She had been handed the microphone to deliver a message, but the weight of Jasmine's words had left her mute. Her earlier bravado had crumbled, her attempts to undermine Jasmine now falling to dust before her eyes. Karoline looked around the room, searching for some form of support, but all she found was silence. The silence spoke volumes. In that silence, the truth was crystal clear. She had lost. The people had made up their minds. But Karoline wasn't ready to let go. She wasn't ready to admit defeat. She had come too far to be silenced by one powerful speech. With a deep breath, she tried to compose herself, adjusting her stance as though ready to launch another attack. But there was no fire in her eyes anymore, only the hollow echoes of someone who was out of her depth. "I can't believe this," Karoline muttered, her voice faltering. "How dare you question me like that in front of these people?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply stood tall, her calm gaze locking with Karoline's, unshaken. "It's not about questioning you, Karoline. It's about questioning the system that's failed us all," she replied, her voice low but steady, dripping with the power of her conviction. It was the perfect counter. Karoline had lost any momentum she once had, and with each failed attempt to claw back her dignity, the room felt it. Karoline's frustration boiled over, and in a final act of desperation, she snapped. "You think you know everything? You think you've got all the answers? You're just like everyone else in Washington, all talk, no action. How is what you're doing any different from what's already been done?" The room quieted. It was as though the very air had thickened with the weight of her words. Jasmine didn't even flinch. She took a long pause, stepping closer to the podium. "The difference, Karoline," Jasmine said softly, but with a sharp edge to her voice, "is that I'm not pretending. I'm not playing a game. I'm here to make sure that the people who need help most get it. That means doing the hard work, listening, and working toward real change. Not making promises that I'll never be able to keep. Not passing bills that benefit only the people who can already afford it. I'm talking about a future where we all have a fair shot, where everyone, no matter who they are, has the same opportunity to succeed." Karoline's eyes narrowed, the last of her defenses crumbling. She was being outmatched on a level she had never experienced before. The debate was over, but Karoline's pride wouldn't let her admit it. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The truth of Jasmine's argument was undeniable, and the reality of it hung like a storm cloud over Karoline's failed retorts. Jasmine stepped back slightly, allowing the gravity of her statement to settle into the minds of everyone in the room. She wasn't just making promises. She was delivering something far more powerful, the belief that things could be different, that the system could be changed, and that people like her, people who truly cared about the well-being of others, were willing to fight for it. And then, with the weight of the world seemingly lifting off her shoulders, Jasmine turned to the audience. She smiled warmly, the power of her message now fully realized. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "This is about all of us. It's about our communities, our families, our future. It's about understanding that we can't just sit back and wait for change to come. We have to make it happen ourselves." The room erupted into applause once again, but this time, it wasn't just polite clapping. It was a standing ovation, loud and genuine. The energy in the room was palpable. It wasn't just about the power of one speech. It was about the unity and conviction that Jasmine had awakened in everyone around her. Karoline, still standing at her podium, had no more fight left in her. She had been outclassed. She had been exposed for what she truly was, someone who wasn't fighting for the people, but for her own self-interest. The weight of Jasmine's words had left her speechless, and now there was nothing left to say. Jasmine took a slow breath, soaking in the moment. She wasn't just a politician anymore. She was a symbol of what it meant to fight for what was right, to stand up for the people who had been silenced for far too long. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but in that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of hope. Because she knew that, with the people behind her, they could make a real difference. And as the room continued to cheer for Jasmine, the echoes of her words reverberating through the space, Karoline took one last look around. She knew she had lost. But Jasmine had won something far more important. She had won the hearts and minds of the people. Jasmine didn't need to say another word. Her actions spoke louder than any speech ever could. The future was now, and it was in the hands of those who were willing to fight for it.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.